Hi guys, it's me Jasmine, and you are watching Faithfully Uncool. So in talking about faith, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 to 22. Feel free to read the words across the screen. While he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed at that moment. Okay guys, so after looking at Matthew chapter 9 verses 18 to 22, I think that we learned three important things about faith. Number one is that faith is intimidating, or it can be intimidating. When we look at this passage, we are immediately directed towards looking at the woman. She's the one who has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. When she goes up to Jesus and touches his cloak, he says, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has healed you." Jesus responds to her very kindly and tells her, "Your faith has healed you." And Jesus has said this at other times in the gospel too, to other people. And I don't know about you, but when I read it, I always kind of think, well, like, how can faith heal you? Like, how can your faith be so large that it heals you? And for me, it sort of makes this story really unrelatable, because I come from a very skeptical background where for a period of time I just was completely skeptical of the scriptures and the Bible and Christ. And so this whole "your faith has healed you" concept is like, well, how does it do that? You know, I've always struggled with it. And so it can be very weird to hear Jesus say "your faith has healed you" to people and try to relate to it. However, we also know a second thing from reading this passage, and that's that faith can be unlikely. Have you ever seen someone go through something, or maybe they lost someone, or they went through a very tragic event, and they seem to almost have an unbreakable faith, or their faith keeps going, or they lean on God in their times of darkness? Now, I'm definitely not saying that this is how it always happens, or even that that's the reason why bad things happen to us, because it's really not a good idea, I think, to romanticize struggle in terms of religion and faith and things like that. However, it can be very inspiring and amazing to witness someone who goes through an event and still persists in following and entrusting and listening to God's voice in their life. And I think that that's really awesome to be a part of. And it really shows us sometimes when we see people do that, sometimes it makes us think, wow, I don't know if I went through the same thing, I could respond that way. I mean, I've struggled with faith, so sometimes when people go through something external in their life that does not seem to affect their internal relationship and faith with God, it can be very interesting and sometimes almost confusing in a way. But I think that when we understand that faith is unlikely, it's important for us to know that faith can be unlikely and it can be unexpected. However, faith is not easy. That does not mean faith is easy. So we don't always see people's internal doubt and struggles with it, and it's important for us to not compare ourselves to them based on that. And when we read passages in the Bible even, it's important for us to realize that faith is not easy. It's not a magical tool that fixes every single thing in our life and makes life easy. So that's also an important thing for us to realize, which brings us to point number 3, which is most important of all of them, and that's that how much faith you have is a very small matter compared to who or what your faith is in. Timothy Keller has this book called The Reason for God, and if you haven't read it, or if you think that you will never have a relationship with Christ, or you already do have a relationship with Christ, it's a really, really insightful read that I highly recommend. And in it, he has a quote where he says, "It is not the depth and purity of your heart, but the work of Jesus Christ on our behalf that saves us." And that is incredibly important for us to realize. It really is not about this woman in this passage. Yes, she is brave. Yes, she is courageous. But while this is her story, it's also a very subtle reminder to us that it's not all about us, but it's also about Christ. Who she puts her faith in is much more important than the actual strength of her faith and how much of it she has. And so that changes the view a lot, because sometimes we'll pray or we'll have this sort of idea that I can't go to God unless I feel completely fulfilled, or I feel like I've just had the greatest day and my faith has just been unshakable right now. But that's really not the case. Sometimes it's that when we feel our most hopeless, or when we feel like we're on the edge of not believing at all, God wants us to talk to him the most. And I feel like that's probably way more likely than just someone having such amazing, great faith that it heals them all the time. And so just to give some perspective on that, I feel like we should always remember that it really is not about us, but it is about who we are speaking to and who our faith is in, and not necessarily that 1 to 10 point faith scale of how much we have. So thanks for watching, guys. I really hope that that encouraged you and was inspiring and insightful to hear. See you in the next one. Go in peace.